Welcome back to Masters of the Universe Classic Director's Commentary. Today we are going to be talking about Webstor and how we turned a adorable little kid from an 80s sitcom into a kick-butt action figure. Okay, yeah, no, I can't keep this up. We're going to be talking about a spider action figure. So, for those of you who don't care for spiders or have an adversity to eight-legged, non-insect crawling things with pinchers and webs and all of that, you should probably turn off this video now. But before turning it off, you should subscribe, like, and ring the bell, right? Did I get that right, YouTube? YouTube wants me to say all those things. Okay, I think I got all the technical stuff out of the way. Now we can dive into the Masters of the Universe Webstor. All right, Webstor. So, whether you like to think of Webstor as the romantic lead from the classic Filmation series, always putting his needs behind those of others, and all right, I can't keep this up either. But Webstor was in the old Filmation series, and he was a favorite in the vintage line because, you know, he was awesome. He was a spider guy, and he had an amazing adaptation for 2000X where they turned him into a much more of a monstrous, six-eyed, many-limbed guy who actually, I think, ate people, which is a lot scarier than just, you know, being on a swing with Evil Lynn. Although I don't think I'd want to be on a swing with Evil Lynn. I wouldn't trust her. But either way, Webstor went through quite a transformation in the 2000X series from the way he was created in the vintage line, but still keeping those sort of core aspects that made the character Webstor. And the Horseman, when transforming a vintage figure into a classics figures, did an absolutely amazing job. I think the way they transformed this, taking into kind of some 2000X aspects, but still really playing up what he looked like in the vintage line, was truly amazing, and they should really be applauded for that. And I think a lot of their approach, and this was a great way to do it, was to look at the vintage line through the lens of how would the line have been done if it had sort of unlimited tooling and unlimited budget? So while the vintage Webstor figure didn't have 8 arms and legs, the extra ones, that was something cool to add. But how did we get Webstor in the line? Well, this was a time we were doing a lot of thinking, because we had just had success. We did Hordak and we did Triclops. We were moving beyond the original 8 back, and it was time to really think about who would be good to add into the line. Now, obviously, we wanted to get to New Adventures characters, and it's probably bad that I'm using Lizor here since we never even did him in the Classics line. But we knew that in 2009, it was a little early to start looking at New Adventures and how to add them. The idea was to get to them long term, but for this first year, when we were still testing the waters, it was time to really stick to kind of core characters that had a big fan base, and we knew would sell above all because we had to prove this line to management. In sales, that's really how they look at it. Not, oh boy, I got my favorite character or my favorite doll. Speaking of dolls, yes, those girls from POP, we also wanted to get to them sooner than later, and we did have Adora planned for year 1, but she got pushed to January of the following year because of, logistics. So what we had to look at was which characters could we do with the basic bucks that we had. We'd already spent a lot of money on fully tooled figures for 2009. Remember, the human buck, the lizard buck, and the beast buck were all 100% tooled figures. So we had already spent a lot of tooling in year 1. And we had to look at who could reuse the bucks we had. So we knew characters like Clawful, for example, was out because he used, if you will, the buzz-off or whiplash parts. I guess whichever was going to be made first was going to be the owner of those parts. I think it wound up being buzz-off, if I remember correctly. But the idea was, so we couldn't do him yet because he was going to need the insectoid, crabby body, which we didn't have yet. And other characters like Spikor, that I loved Spikor. He was one of my favorites from the vintage line. But he was going to have to also be off the table because we weren't quite sure how to do the spike armor at this point. He wound up being easier to do tooling-wise when we did do him. But at the moment, we kind of wanted to stick to the low-hanging fruit, prove the line out, prove it had sales so that management would let us keep going. And we wanted to look at characters also who were not in the 2000X line. Like, again, Spikor, maybe this is how he would have been imagined in 2000X, but we wanted to kind of look at who was used in the show, who had a big part, who wasn't in the show. It was a balance between a lot of that and, at the end of the day, tooling. So Scarecrow, also another character that we looked at to do early on, and possibly for this slot, because again, he had very little tooling. He was not in the 2000X show or the line, so that might have been cool. And he was also a glow-in-the-dark skeleton, and that would have been, an amazing figure to do. Well, it was an amazing figure, and we did actually do him pretty quickly in the line. But he wasn't in 2000X, and we wanted to stick with someone more recognizable. There is a very interesting story about Scareglow, and because he was such a late figure in the vintage line and had so little tooling, and I'll talk about that when we get to him. But yeah, he definitely makes a very interesting story about how he got put into the vintage line more so than into the classics line. Okay, I'm totally off track because this video is supposed to be at Webstor. So again, looking at Webstor, he had minimal new parts. He basically used the reptile and human body parts that we had, that we'd spent a lot of tooling on. Again, these were 100% tooled figures for year one. In further years, we got to reuse the parts, but that first year we had to make those bodies. That was a lot of tooling. And looking at all the different iterations of him, he basically, was just new armor and a new gun and, a new grappling hook, if you will, and a new head, of course. Everyone gets a new head. And, more or less, he was going to be relatively inexpensive to do, but very dynamic looking. And that's kind of what won the day. So, looking at the past iterations of him between Vintage and 2000X, again, what the Horsemen really did was they took influence from 2000X and sort of reimagined the Vintage figure as if it had the tooling budget to kind of do unlimited things. And I loved the way they kind of did a 2000X head without doing a 2000X head. They just kind of took influence from it and blended it with the Vintage figure, and this really was that awesome harmony between both styles, the 2000X interpretation and the Vintage figure interpretation, or what became the classic. Vintage was the origin, what went into the machine on side one, and then, side B spit out either classics or 2000X. And of course, giving him his grappling hook so he could, scale walls and hang from ceilings was very important. And I should probably talk about this because this was one of the early times in the line where I really put my foot in my mouth and misspoke, kind of pissing off a lot of fans, or at least sort of misleading them unintentionally. So in the copy for this print ad, I had talked about how Webstor was going to have a grappling hook allowing him to climb walls just like you remember. I believe that was the exact quote I used. Now, I meant the way you remember kind of in your mind, not literally it was going to work the same. And that's because if you look at the backpacks, we couldn't do an action feature. And I want to use this time to explain why that is. So an action feature, like having a pulley system in the actual backpack, or, like these, DC characters from Toy Biz, or Kenner, excuse me, they all had action features back in the day. These figures were, a figure with an action feature built in has almost 100% sculpt, because the feature has to be built into the mechanism of the character. So a good example is Beastman here from 2000X. The 2000X line all had action features. Beastman's was his arm would raise up and down in kind of like a striking motion by pressing this lever on his back, which meant that not only did he have a lever sticking out of his back, making it more kid-friendly, less collector-friendly figure, but it had to have a mechanism inside, and there was no way in Classics we were going to have the budget to build these mechanisms. So when we said there wasn't going to be action features, we meant kind of action features that were going to require either buttons sticking out to interrupt the sculpt, or action features that were going to require mechanisms inside, like a mechanism to pull up on Webstor's rope. We were going to do the rope, but it wasn't going to have a mechanism to have it actually, like retract, if you will. So I definitely misspoke, and I learned my lesson. It's like people took me very literally, and I had to really watch what I said. But we got the rope in there, and we got the grappling hook in there, and that was kind of the point, because the backpack would have never held the mechanism and also had those extra articulated arms. And it was much more important to have articulation in the figure than to have an action feature, especially tooling-wise. So, all right, with that behind us, there's also, of course, his giant spider look that we never got to, but that would have been really cool. I just wanted to make sure to throw this in because there was a fan custom I saw online that did this, and that was pretty kick butt. That would have been an awesome deluxe figure to do, which we never got to. All right, regardless of that look, he did get the extra arms, which, if you wanted to put them down to his side, you still got the silhouette of the vintage figure, or if you wanted the arms, to be up, then he could have, that sort of 2000 XE look as well. And we were really building up Skeletor's army now. I mean, he had quite a lot of flunkies. This was like really feeling like a line. And I don't know, Webstor just kind of like really fleshed it out a lot. I don't know what it was, but he made it feel a lot more like a line. And wouldn't be a Webstor video without talking about his bio, which we pulled a lot of material from this, actually, from not just the vintage card back, which provided the final line of the bio. For most bios, the final line was the single line of copy on the vintage card back. But we also looked a lot at the UK comics. Webstor had a very robust appearance in the UK comics, and he wound up getting kind of his origin fleshed out a lot there. So we were able to pull some stuff from there. And that was really cool because the whole idea was to pull from everything we possibly could, even if we were only making allusions to it. And like one of those was Arachnia City, which we talked about Webstor being from there in his bio, and then eventually, when we got to the Subternia map, we kind of paid that off, and we showed how big that city was because of the idea that it was underground, and that's why you really didn't see many Webstors. And that was basically it. We created the greatest spider-influenced action figure of all time, right? And no one ever made an action figure with a spider-like name ever again, because we did it and no one else would ever do a figure based on a spider. Yeah.